When referring to the periodic table, the transition metals are located in the middle, also known as D block or group B. Transition metals are more electronegative than main group metals. Also, many transition metals can form more than one type of cation. For example, copper ion can have a 1+ charge or a 2+ charge. Compounds formed from these elements will have different properties. In order to specify an element's oxidation state or oxidation number, you must use a Roman numeral in parentheses. Going back to the previous example, Cu+ is copper 1 ion and Cu2+ is copper 2 ion. Here are a few practice problems. Please pause the tutorial and determine the correct formula or name for each example. For problem number 1, since there is a Roman numeral 2 in parentheses, the correct answer is Fe2+. Here are the rest of the answers. Also note that some transition elements, such as zinc and silver, do not have multiple charges. Therefore, it is unnecessary to include a Roman numeral when naming these ions. Here is a list of ionic compounds, ions, and their formulas. Please pause the tutorial and determine the naming pattern. Use the questions provided to identify the pattern. Hopefully you've noted that for these ionic compounds, the first element in the formula was a transition metal and the second was a nonmetal. Also note that positive ions or cations were metals, and the nonmetals form negative ions, also called anions. In a previous screencast, naming an ionic compound consisted of writing the name of the cation and then writing the name of the anion. Also note that the name of the nonmetal ends in "ide". Since each element consists of a transition metal and a nonmetal, a Roman numeral is added to the name to denote the charge of the cation or the transition metal. For example, the correct name for FeCl2 is iron 2 chloride. Let's try a practice problem. What is the correct answer for the following question? In order to figure out the correct name for this compound, first determine the charge of the anion. By looking at the periodic table, we see that the anion oxygen is located in group 6A, which means that oxygen has a charge of 2 negative. Since the oxygen has a 2 negative charge, the transition metal must have a 3+ charge. Let's try another practice problem. What is the correct formula for copper 2 oxide? In order to determine the correct formula, first write the cation and anion for copper 2 oxide. Then determine how many cations and anions are needed to produce a neutral compound. Since the 2+ cancels out 2 negative, the correct formula for copper 2 oxide is CuO. It is incorrect to write the compound as Cu2O2 because chemical formulas of ionic compounds are always written as the lowest ratio of elements. In order to determine the formula, first write the cation and anion. Then, determine how many cations and anions are needed to produce a neutral compound. Notice that the lowest common multiple for the charges is 6. Therefore, multiply the Fe3+ by 2 and the S2 negative by 3. By doing this, the charge is balanced. This means that 2 iron ions and 3 sulfide ions are present in this compound, which results in the formula of Fe2S3. Here is the correct answer for problem number 1. For problem number 2, the correct name is iron 3 chloride. For problem number 3, here's the correct answer. Lastly, the correct name for number 4 is cadmium oxide.